All right, everybody, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Hearing. I'm very excited to be joined today by Dr. Juliette Sterkens and Dr. Susan Taulia. So thank you two very much for joining me today. We're going to have a conversation all about loops. Juliette, you're a very big proponent of looping and all things looping, so it made a lot of sense to have you on for this discussion, and I really appreciate that you brought Susan as well to provide a sort of firsthand experience as a clinician that is really, kind of advocating for this on behalf of her patients and in her community. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, why don't we start with some introductions? So I'll kick it over to you, Juliette, a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thanks very much, Dave, for inviting us. And I'm Juliette Sterkens, moved here from the Netherlands over 40 years ago. Studied speech pathology, then switched to audiology, owned a private practice for almost 26 years in Wisconsin. And since 2012, I've been the HLAA, National Hearing Loop Advocate. I get grant funding, and that allows me to really focus on assistive listening. It's not just about loops. I keep saying that to everybody. It's really about helping our patients hear everywhere where their hearing aids are unable to deliver.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. And Susan.
I am Susan Taulia. I'm an audiologist in Lafayette, Indiana. I'm a private practice owner. We own the Lafayette Hearing Center. And I started my career in large teaching hospitals and with ear, nose, and throat clinics. Moved around some early in my career, have been in Indiana since 2007. I love working with Juliette. I always say yes, every opportunity I get. She is fabulous. And so, Dave, thank you again for inviting both of us to spread the word about the beauty of hearing loops.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So let's start. For anybody that isn't well informed, either of you can take this, but do you want to just maybe give a background on what loops are, how they work, the science, I guess, if you will, behind this? Maybe this would be good for you, Juliette.
Perfect. Hearing loops in its simplest form, broadcast audio straight from a microphone, or it could be a television, could be a podium, could be a pulpit in a church, wirelessly to a hearing aid, as long as the hearing aid has a telecoil, and the telecoil has been turned on, activated by the consumer. Literally, you can walk into a church, in an auditorium, but also a city cab in New York City or London, or in the underground information points, switch your hearing aid to telecoil and get the sound from the announcement or the PA system wirelessly in the hearing aid. And as such, it provides the best sound possible with very high signal-to-noise ratios, which means that people who have trouble hearing in background of noise usually say, I can hear every word. It's like the minister is sitting right next to me. So it's been around for 40, 50 years, but what is new is the hearing loop standard. And so in a nutshell, hearing loops sends clear audio straight into telecoils of hearing aids.
Beautiful. Yeah, it really is a fascinating technology. It's a very old technology, which is neat. And we'll overlay an image of the logo, and it's cool to see these. Once you see it everywhere. But it's one of those things that it really does, to your point, I think it adds value to T-coil-enabled hearing aids, ones that have the T-coil like literally integrated into it, as well as some, non-hearing aid assistive devices that are almost standalone for this application. So you think of, older adults that, might be inclined to go to church often, and this gives them the ability to tether right into that sound source. So like you said, it's like the minister standing beside them or the priest. It's really, really cool technology. So I think, it's one of those things where it's, even as it's been around for as long as it is, it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, where it's like you have to have the environments that you would be going into to be looped. And so there needs to be awareness. There needs to be advocacy of, making the argument for why these different venues should be looped. Which is why I'm really excited, Susan, that you're here, because I'm curious to kind of like hear about your experience. Like, when was the first time that this started to become something that you felt strongly about, to the point to where you wanted to start to get involved with some of these things, maybe outside of the clinic, where you are involving yourself in your community, to have these types of environments looped? Can you just kind of give us a background of what your experience has kind of been like in this realm of your profession?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Dave. It's a great question. So where I live, 10-15 years ago, there were no loops here at all. And after going to a seminar hosted by Dr. Sterkens and another audiologist in the Chicago area, Dr. Linda Remensteiner, the woman that started the private practice where I now work, and I hosted an event. This has been more than 10 years ago now, at a community center. We got some people to come. One of the people that came to that event was the head bishop of the diocese, the Catholic diocese where we live. And in that presentation, we had a temporary loop set up by a loop installer. And we talked about the importance of the signal to noise ratio, like what Juliette mentioned. And Julia has a wonderful presentation that she does where she's got all the acoustics recorded in a church, with a live microphone, and then through the loop where you don't have that reverberation. And that was a real eye-opener for particularly Father Dan, who was there at our presentation. And he promptly went back to his diocese and got money to get the St. Mary's Cathedral here in Lafayette looped. And that was the first loop besides our waiting room in our area. And after that, it just kind of spread, not as fast as wildfire, but it just spread like little bit by little bit by little bit. At first it was St. Mary's, and then it was St. Mary's and St. Lawrence, and then it was St. Mary's, St. Lawrence, and the Rec Room at St. Lawrence, and then it was St. Mary's, St. Lawrence, and St. Boniface, and it was just like one after another after another. And now, like, a lot of the Catholic churches around here are looped, and it's kind of, you have to remember which ones aren't, because they mostly are. And then the Presbyterians started looping, and the Methodists, so it's just kind of like spread out. And Linda and Juliette both have a saying. They said, "Loops begat loops." And I think that's very, very true. And one thing that's kind of neat now, we have a list that we try to maintain of all the loops in our area. And I'm at the point now where we're finding out that, we didn't know that place got looped. And so there's stuff that's not on our list because nobody even told us that it got looped, because they did it on their own.
That's awesome.
Which is really great, yeah.
So do you feel that it's really interesting how you just described the cascading effect, loops beget loops? I think that's really a great way to put it. Are you finding that the people that are really advocating for this are like the churchgoers themselves? Is it the clergy? Like, who are the ones that are spreading the word of, hey, I just saw that this church was looped. We should really be, I'm assuming it's kind of a mix, but can you give me any sense of that, of like, who's really kind of going to bat, unbeknownst to you, about we need to have these things, and we need to figure out how to raise money in order to do so?
I think this is one that both of us can probably address. It's a combination. It's a combination of patients and their loved ones saying, I can't tell you how many times we've heard stories of, I almost stopped going to church because I couldn't hear. I almost canceled my my theater tickets, my season tickets, because I couldn't hear anymore, and it was not fun, and now I can do it, and people are excited. It's a combination of those people, and then talking to people who are in decision-making positions. So I call it people in power, or people with influence. Right. You have to have those people in the mix and tied in, because a church is a collection of people, and not one person is going to make those kinds of decisions with the church's finances and the money, and then who's going to do it and all of that. So you have to have the push from people who would benefit from it, combined with people that are powerful enough to make those decisions.
Yeah. And what I did, Dave, for about a year and a half, everybody who came into my office, I asked, do you belong to a house of worship? Do you like going to the library meetings, or do you go to the Performing Arts Center? And basically kept track of who went where. And, I live in a community with 75,000 people. So, and then surrounding communities, I basically, every time when somebody says, oh, I belong to St. Mary's, oh, I go to Grace Lutheran, I basically put their name under the G for Grace Lutheran and under the M from St. Mary's. So within a year, I knew who went where. And frequently, our patients don't know from each other that they can't hear in church. They all sit there, they nod, they smile, and they say amen because they know when they have to do that. But they really aren't hearing. And by bringing those people together, I was able to kind of, literally get them to advocate. I gave them tools, but first you have to give them the experience. So I don't know, Susan, if you send Lutherans to Catholic churches, but I did too. But I'm not Catholic or I'm not Lutheran. It's like, I don't care. Go. And
we did. Yeah, in the beginning, we would actually you had a little list of like this. These are the service times. You're welcome to go and experience this.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I brought this up at a university where I did a lecture just a couple of days ago. And they said, that's a question we cannot ask of our patients. So, being in private practice, maybe I have a little bit more leeway, but I was so involved with my patients.
Yeah.
And so when they started coming back saying, I can hear every word in church. And I'd say, well, where else do you go? Where else? Well, I go to the library meetings sometime, or I go to City Hall. And it's like, basically, I don't want to say nudge them, but encourage them to speak up and not keep their inability of hearing a secret. We need to tell people or the world when a person with hearing loss isn't hearing. And I know Susan has developed really cute cards that give patients permission to complain and then to also help spread the word.
That's very interesting. So in my mind, there's this piece, right, which is like developing patient advocacy, making your patients their own advocates. And I can imagine like that's actually probably a great way to just dramatically enhance your word of mouth value in your marketing, because you imagine that as soon as people start singing the praises of, I have this hearing aid or even this amplified device that I'm using in this setting, chances are they're telling their friends that too, right? So that could be a great source of referrals, I would imagine.
And basically, when a church got looped, I frequently got called in to do a hearing loop dedication or a little brief presentation from the pulpit. And then I'd say, I'll be here afterwards. If you have any questions about your hearing aids, I'm happy to look at your hearing aids. And basically, I would send and look at hearing aids and say, you need to go back to your audiologist and have the telecoil activated.
Yeah.
So within no time in the community, people had heard or seen me. And that was good PR. I won't deny that. Yeah.
But so I think, because you have this is one of the different, pillars. And then I think that the demonstrating the value and that just being able, like you said, having people go, Catholics go to Lutheran churches and that stuff. But I almost think of and I'm curious to ask you, Susan, in your clinic, how are you, I would imagine, are you showing off what a loop sounds like? Do you have a small personal loop, more or less, to demonstrate how this works for people?
We had our waiting room where we have the luxury of having a pretty wide waiting room. And so part of it is got kind of what I call normal clinical type of chairs that aren't super comfortable. I mean, they're not uncomfortable, but they're not like plush or anything. And then we have another side of our waiting room that is set up kind of like a living room. And that area is looped. And we actually leave the TV volume off. And there's a sign under the TV that says, if you want help hearing this TV, ask us or put your hearing aids on loop. And so that area is looped. And then we also can demonstrate other systems to transmit TV into their hearing aids. So it's a very comfortable setting. And so a lot of patients that use the T-coil, they'll just come in, turn the TV on, and sit down and put themselves on. But you gotta go look for them. And it's a nice way to practically show people how to use the loop to walk them out there and say, okay, now get your app out and put it on T-coil, and then they're like, oh, I can hear the TV now. You're like, yeah.
Seeing is believing.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's hearing is believing.
Yeah.
And they all say the same thing to their spouse. Can you hear that? No, because they don't have a T-coil, right?
Yeah.
And I would turn the volume very quiet on the television so they could still hear it, but it was toned very quiet. And then they would switch. I would make them switch back and forth so that they fully understood that it's really the loop that's helping them understand speech. And that's a great lead-in to talk about TV streamers.
Yes.
Because if you don't do TV streamers, you're missing this whole opportunity to get people to hear television so much better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just the notion of being able to help with communication across the board, and it's positioning yourself as not just a single solution professional. Like I'm going to help tailor, all aspects of your life in any way that I possibly can to optimize it. I think there's tremendous opportunity there. And I think that what you said, Susan, like setting up your waiting room in a way where you can make it conducive to this, I think is so powerful. I'm sure you could attest to that, whether it's like proving the value of the loop or being able to show people like, here's what a TV listening device sounds like, those kinds of things. Because to your point, Juliette, it's like hearing is believing. Until you see it and you're just sort of like reading the description of it, it doesn't click. It doesn't register, I think, the way that it does when you actually get to experience it firsthand.
I think another thing that is really important for people watching this to understand is that getting, you can't do this, no, as audiologists, we don't have the background. I mean, maybe a few of us do, but most of us don't have the engineering background to do this ourselves. We don't have, you're working, you're doing your job every day. You don't have the time to go out and install loops, for example, or things like that. But you can empower your patients to empower the people in your community to be advocates for this. I mean, there are tons of hearing impaired people out there, and they all need help in these big, large public environments. And all it takes is one or two who know people to get them motivated to get it to happen. We're in Purdue University's backyard, and there was an architect there that works at the university, but that has hearing loss, and he's been very instrumental in getting university to invest in hearing loop technology. And there are a number of buildings on campus now that are looped, and classrooms and things like that. And they even have a few classrooms with what they call a reverse loop, where there are microphones that can then feed back into the system for anybody with a hearing loss, whether you're the lecturer or a participant in the room.
That's right.
And of course, that really requires smart and savvy hearing loop installers.
Yeah.
And not just a hearing loop installer, but somebody who fully understands audio and knows how to tap into the audio signal, and whether a loop needs to be fed with a handheld microphone, wireless, or whether perhaps it can be done with microphones hanging from the ceiling in a classroom.
Yes. So this segues nicely into kind of the last big section I wanted to discuss, which is if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a provider that, is listening to this and they're like really excited about it, all that, the question is sort of like, where do you start in a way? And a big part of this whole thing is the loop installation. So I'm curious from both of you, just what can you share with either your experience, Susan, of what you've gone through? It sounds like you've made some great connections that are people that are savvy and they're good at this kind of thing. But just like in general, where can you turn to find, any kind of existing installation partners or anything like that? Because it seems like this could be kind of part of the gap is I believe in this. I really want this to be a big part of it, but how do I get that theater or that church looped? It's a process, right? And so what are some of the things that I'm sure you get these questions a lot. How can people be thinking about this, and how can you speak to that?
Well, we're in the Midwest, and we're lucky enough to have a couple of loop installers in our area. There's a wonderful company, Thunder Hearing, that's based out of Wisconsin, and the guy that went to Prairie, Tom and his son.
Yep.
They have done a lot of the loops in this area, and then there's another gentleman who runs an audio business.
Yep.
And he went and got specialized training from Contacta, and has done a lot of the loops in our area as well. And so developing that relationship, if you go to the manufacturer's websites and they don't have anybody in your area listed as a contact person, you might be able to foster a relationship with somebody that is really, the people that do audio in your area, and talk to them and see if you can get them interested in getting some training to add this to what they do.
Yeah. I was lucky enough that I had an engineer husband who said, "Honey, if you let me retire, I'll become your loop installer." But it quickly dawned on us that we were not going to loop Wisconsin, right? It's physical work. It means installing the wire in ceilings, in basements, crawling over floors. The wire has to be installed where it must be in order to create a strong magnetic field. And these installers need to be trained. This is not just let's plug in an FM system, plug and play. In the Midwest, there's some really great installers, and the first place to look would be hearingloop.org under the word vendors. So if you Google hearingloop.org and vendors, there's a number of vendors that pop up. There's another website called Time to Loop America, time number 2, Loop America. He also has a list of vendors. And then frequently I get emails from audiologists. There's a church or there is a theater that's getting ready to remodel. Now is the time to put in a loop. And that's kind of when I jump into gear, because there are loop installers who will literally travel hundreds of miles to do loop installations. They're efficient, they know what they can do, and they can do it in a very short time. And every hearing loop that has to be installed needs a site visit. You cannot just, look at a picture and go, "Oh, yeah, we can put a loop in this place."
Right.
Because it really depends on the amount of metal in the building, the size of the venue, and the difficulty hiding the wire, in effect. So if there's a beautiful terrazzo floor, it's going to be a lot trickier than if there is a dropped ceiling where the wire can be hidden in the dropped ceiling. So this installer needs to come, do a measurement, verify that it can be done the way he envisions it can be done. And that's when you will end up with a quote. Some of my patients literally stepped forward and said, "You mean a loop in my little Lutheran church cost $4,000? And I go, "Yeah." And they wrote out a check.
Wow.
No lie. And these are the same patients who complained about the high cost of hearing aids. And they turn around. Yeah, have you had the same thing, Susan?
Yeah.
Frequently, money is not the issue. It's they don't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's something that will benefit the community, people step forward.
Yeah, 100%. Is that you've gone through the same thing, Susan?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I have. I was just thinking of my patient that paid to Luke his own church, and then some of his other people that went to his church have come to us to do I have the T-coil? Can you turn it on? Get him hearing aids. I mean, yeah, it just feeds on itself. So
yeah. And then, of course, it helps if you have connections with the newspaper. We have a church lady who writes a column every Sunday. And basically, I would feed her information. Some in the beginning, every 6 months. Now it's been every couple of years. We just looped 500 churches in Wisconsin. So it's a huge mile marker.
Yeah.
Over 850 venues, a lot of libraries. There's grant funding available for libraries. Community foundations are frequently very interested in learning about hearing loops. Schools have ADA funding that they can at least contribute to the cost of a loop. But it means that you need patients who will praise loops and announce that there's, or the venue announces that there's a loop. And that brings me to that last point that we already talked about before we went on the air, and that's Google Maps, right? It's kind of the missing link. How do you know where there's a hearing loop? And there's a committee, the HLAA Get in the Hearing Loop Committee, GITHL committee, and we are working with Google Maps to map every hearing loop in this country on Google Maps. So you need your phone app, you Google a name, under the term about, you can then see whether a venue has a loop. You can also write a review if you've used a loop, and you can also make a comment. This place would really benefit from a hearing loop. And there's all kinds of tools on HLAA's website. If you Google Get in the Hearing Loop GITHL Toolkit for audiologists who are watching this, there's handouts there, things you can share with your patients. I mean, lots of information. And it can sound all very overwhelming. This doesn't happen overnight. And I know that there's discussion about new technology coming around the corner, Bluetooth LE audio. I mean, it's very promising. I've heard it at a conference in Budapest. But it means every hearing aid, every smartphone, every smart TV, every silent TV at an airport is going to have to be equipped with this Auracast technology. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, our patients deserve to hear now,
Yes.
today.
Yeah, I think it's, you're right. I think it's something that's cause to be excited about on the horizon. And in the interim, I think that there's a lot that you can do. I mean, I've learned a lot today just talking with you two. I've kind of known about loops, but I didn't know the ins and the outs of it like this. And it's really good to know about these different resources that you mentioned about where you can find a local vendor that could do the loop installation. I think the Google Maps piece, integrating that is huge. More visibility into this. Very, very cool. So I just find this to be, I think as Susan can attest here, it's just a great way to, I think, really enhance the overall perception that your patients in the broader community has about the, hearing healthcare professional and the role that they play is not just a place that you go to get fit with hearing aids, but it's much more than that. This is a place that can, and a professional that can really enhance all of these different parts of your life and these things that really matter to you. I think that as we've discussed today, some of the different scenarios that mean a lot to people, you don't have to give up your season tickets at the theater. You don't have to stop going to church. Those things can actually really be made. You can give people the gift of like restoring the ability to feel like they're connected again to those.
They belong.
They belong.
Huge. And I think if I can make one more plug,
sure,
and that is that we as a hearing care provider community have failed our patients by not checking out assistive listening systems every time we go to the theater. Because if you're going to a theater and you pick up an FM device or an infrared device and you find out that it's not working, or worse, that they're not feeding any sound into these systems, these systems should come equipped with neck loops. And I've certainly heard of consumers that they like using the neck loop at the Oriental Theater in Chicago. They have listening devices that come with neck loops. And that can certainly work, but you first have to educate your patients. And we have to try these devices out to be able to give the feedback to the venues, like, you've got this system, it's not working. If you're looking at upgrading, may I make a suggestion you put in a loop? And now you've kind of planted a seed, right?
Yes. Well said. Susan, closing thoughts?
Well, don't wait. If you've thought about this, get out there and do it. Like, no one else is going to do this in your community. You have to do it yourself. So waiting isn't going to help. Get out there, put together a presentation, invite everybody in your community that you can invite, host a meeting, and get it going, because you're the one who's going to have to do this.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share PowerPoints and slides. You do not have to reinvent the wheel if you're watching this presentation. Literally, I get grant funding from Dr. Fund or to help kind of fuel this momentum, right? So you do not have to go at it alone.
That's awesome. What's the best way to contact you?
I'm at Juliette J. Sterkens at hearingloss.org.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Susan, Juliette, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing all of this. It's been really enlightening. So I appreciate that. And thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end. We will chat with you next time.